So what's amazing here is actually seeing from the guys how they rate the tuna, how they see the fat content. So now, when we grade the tuna, what do you look for in the tuna?
It's first we see color first.
Yep.
And then even though fat color, just good color, still good money. But color and fat is the best. The size also important too.
The bigger fish are a lot more thick-set, and then obviously they've had years of flavour going through them.
So if I was a tuna, I'd be like a really good one, aged and fat. I'd be perfect. You want that section white on the sides, and you want nice red colour for southern bluefin in the centre knuckle here. So there's a little bit there. That one's got better fat in it here. You can see it's a bit wider. Which is the best one? This one. That one. That's the best one. Nice, and that's still nice colour in the knuckle there as well. So that's your fat content on the sides, and then you want a darker red, isn't it? You want that darker red
and stickiness.
So it's got that oily.
Yes. If you're sticky, that's good meat. So color more come up, oil more come up.
Ah, right. Yeah. It's a real art form, isn't it? Or it's a real science.
Well, the moment you hook that fish, you're determining the quality. The whole fight on the boat, in the ice. Maintaining the temperature, and then obviously the cold logistics to wherever it's going. And the thing is, you don't know when you're catching it, so you treat every fish like a sashimi A-grade fish.
That's a good call, isn't it? Every fish is a quality one. So now learning that process is giving us a much better quality out of the fish.
Yeah.
This is amazing for me to see how it's actually done.
Hello everyone, this is Chef Hawks again. Now we are on chapter number 18, seafood. And so included in this we have our saltwater as well as our freshwater fish as part of our seafood. So let's get into it now. So let's look at the safety and inspection and grading of fish to get started with. So the United States Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, they monitor the interstate fish shipments. So all the fish which come in on the ships, everything that is moved around between our states is all monitored by the FDA. So our processors all over the country, they are required to adopt a Hassip Plan. And so that is hazard analysis with critical control points. So this is where those processors have to look at their entire length of their chain from when those fish are drawn out of that water and from where they're possibly broken down and then transported, refrigerated, frozen, and processed. They have to look at every step of the way during that chain to make sure that everything is controlled in such a way that at every critical control point there is an analysis made as to how they can minimize the dangers within that. But now the FDA does not inspect the actual seafood itself. So the United States Department of Commerce has a voluntary seafood inspection system in place. So they are processed under the federal inspection, the PUFI. And so this is all about making sure that our seafood is safe and wholesome for us. So it's packed in various operations to meet the sanitary guidelines which are given, and this is done by the National Marine Fisheries Service, the NMFS. So the National Marine Fisheries Service publishes grades for seafood, and so this includes both fresh and processed seafoods, and so then they give it a grade. And so this can be A, B, C, or below standard. And so the things that they are actually grading is the appearance, how that fish looks, any blemishes and damage to that fish, what the color looks like if it's appropriate to that specific fish, any dehydration issues that they may see, flavor qualities, the odor of that fish, the texture, and the uniformity of that fish. So in order to get a US grade A standard, that's the highest quality that's awarded. And so this is given when you have excellent appearance, great flavor, no bad odors, free of any blemishes or defects to the fish, and that they are then marked with that stamp, the grade A stamp. This is what you would generally find if you are in a restaurant or in a food service operation. Then grade B. Now, grade B is when it's still good quality. There may be some blemishes or other defects. Now, these can still be used in restaurants, and you may well find that if you purchase some of these items, it may be that you don't get the whole fish, it may be that you get the fillets, or it may have been broken down into smaller pieces so as to dispose of any possible defects that may be on that fish. Grade C is a relatively good quality. That's where you don't have to have that whole fish appearance, and you're definitely going to be trimming everything up to make in smaller pieces. And then you have below standard. That's the bad quality. That's where we will be aiming away from. You would have to, when you make your purchase as a culinarian, you'd be making your purchase from your purveyor, and you would be specifically selecting the kind of quality you're looking for. So this is really important depending on what you're going to use that fish for, because the fact is, if you're going to use it, maybe if you're making salmon cakes where you're not going to have that whole piece of salmon together, why would you order grade A salmon to make that with? The difference between grade A salmon and grade B salmon isn't necessarily the flavor, the quality, the freshness. It may just be that that salmon had some kind of a blemish, some kind of a defect that doesn't affect the quality of the rest of the meat, just that small part that was removed. But if you are using whole fillets of trout, or if you're using the whole body of the trout, including the head and the fins, in your presentation, you'll want it to be grade A so that you can actually show off the quality of it and the beauty of it. So when we're looking at fish, we start to subdivide. So when we're looking at shellfish, so shellfish is where there is an outer shell. There's no backbone to it. They have what we call an exoskeleton, which is where, as you can see over on the right over here, you see the crab and the lobster. Basically, their backbone is their exoskeleton, their shell that surrounds them instead of having bones on the inside. They live in salt water, and so when you're subdividing these, crustaceans are the ones that have the outer skeletons, just like on the picture right here. These are all crustaceans. They have jointed appendages, so where you see the claws and the legs, they all have joints on those. So this includes shrimp, lobster, and crab. Then we have another segment in our shellfish, and this includes mollusks. So they have either one or two hard shells. They're either univalves, like abalone. Univalves are when they have one shell, or if they're bivalves, then they have two shells. So if you're looking at things like clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops, like these scallops right here are bivalves. You see you have the two shell parts with the actual scallop right in the center here. And then you have cephalopods. We can see one right down here. This is when you have a fish that has muscular tentacles around the head, and this includes octopus and squid. So common mollusks that are used in restaurants: oysters, clams, mussels, scallops, squid, and octopus. We can very often be purchasing these live and fresh. You can purchase them frozen as well, or canned. They can either come in their shells or out of their shells, which we call those are shucked when they have been removed from their shells. So common crustaceans that we use in restaurants is lobsters, shrimp, crabs, and crayfish. So let's look at how we classify our lobsters. So lobsters are classified by weight. So you have chicken lobsters, nothing to do with the actual bird. This is just how we're classifying here. So those are a 1 pound lobster. And then you have quarter lobsters, which is around about 1 1/4 pounds. Then you have select lobsters. They go from about 1 1/2 to 2 1/4 pounds. And then you have jumbo lobsters, 2 1/2 pounders. These are big lobsters. And then you have a separate type of lobster, which are rock lobsters. These are spiny lobsters or langoustine lobsters. So these are purchased live in most cases. So you would actually be looking for very specific things, and we'll talk about this later on when you're looking at purchasing live lobsters and live crustaceans. You can actually buy the meat individually already cooked. and so they can be fresh or frozen. You can purchase the lobster meat canned, and you can buy it individually quick frozen, which we will talk about that shortly as well. So let's look at crabs. So some common crabs that we find in food service operations, that would include Alaskan king crab, Alaskan snow crab, Dungeness crab, blue crab, softshell crab, and stone crab. Softshell crab are actually a type of crab which are harvested at a very specific time of year, and so what you're actually looking for in the springtime for these crabs, they will shed their shell. Like a lot of other shellfish do, they shed their shell when they've hit a certain size in their growing cycle, and before that shell on their new shell underneath hardens up, you literally have a very short period of time when you can harvest those crabs, and you can eat them whole by just trimming off a few things like the face and the gills, a couple of other bits and pieces. You can eat the whole crab. It's very popular to have those. They can be battered and fried, or literally just cooked as is, maybe just dusted in flour and cooked up as is with the legs on and everything in there. Gives an amazing appearance. You can purchase crabs live. You can purchase them frozen in their shells, previously cooked. You can get cooked frozen meat, and you can get canned lump crab meat as well. And so, common shrimp used in food service operations. So we have several different types here, and these include Gulf whites, pink, brown, and black tiger tiger shrimp. And then you also have prawns, they're a much larger shrimp, and they actually have claws on 3 pairs of their legs. Alright, so let me show you a little bit about prawns and about how they should be processed. There's a process called deveining. It has nothing to do with a vein that carries blood. It's more actually to do with the gastrointestinal tract. Take a look.
Prawns and shrimp, very similar. Prawns have an extra set of pinchers right up in the front. We're going to peel, devein, and today we're going to take it one step further, and I'm going to show you how to butterfly the prawn as well. First things first, we are going to remove the head by holding onto the head and the tail separately and just twisting off. For the prawn tail, we're going to use our deveiner. We're going to go in straight at the top of the shell and just follow all the way down. Then with our hands, we're just going to come back and peel everything off. And we'll use our tool to open up the tail and just remove that as well. Now you'll see intestinal tract, some other organs in here. We're just going to use our hands to just make sure we get all of those out. And now that we have it cleaned up, take the sharp part of our shrimp knife here, and right where that intestinal tract was, we're just going to follow that line, being careful not to cut all the way through the underside of the prawn. And once you have it opened up, you can cut a little bit on one side, a little bit on the other side. Just very shallow cuts here until the prawn lays flat. And that's how you butterfly a prawn. Butterflying is particularly great for even quick cooking, but these certainly lend themselves well to being grilled shell on. You can broil them, bake them, boil them, steam them. It's just a great product to work with.
And so some popular forms of those types of shrimp that we find in our marketplace. So we have fresh, we have heads on, we have raw, and then we have head off, which are also called green headless, which is where you would have the head removed but the shell on. You can have peeled, where they've been completely peeled back. And then you can have deveined, which is what we just looked at in that video, where it shows that they take out the gastrointestinal tract. And then we also have cooked, peeled, and deveined. And then we have IQF. So in fact, let me show you a little video about what IQF is. That's individual quick frozen.
In this fresh clip, we're going to learn a little bit about IQF. IQF is individually quick frozen food products. Let's take a look at this in our food lab.
So I'm going to start with a poor example of frozen shrimp. In this example, you can see the shrimp are frozen in a block. I remember in the old days, if I wanted to buy some frozen shrimp, I had to buy an entire frozen block of shrimp, thaw them out, and then use the entire package. With IQF, or individually quick frozen, the shrimp are individual in the package and allow for greater portionability. Also, the other benefit is the way the process works is once the shrimp, and it could be shrimp, chicken, vegetables, fruit, once it enters the freezer, two things happen. One is the shrimp's frozen, crust frozen on the surface, which does not allow for sticking together, which gives you the IQF. And also that quick crust freeze locks in the moisture and gives you a smaller ice crystal, which improves the quality and integrity of the product.
So now we know a little bit about IQF, individually quick frozen food products. We can do this with any number of products, from shrimp and seafood to vegetables to fruits, diced raw or cooked meat products, or dairy products.
And so, very popular in food service operation are deheaded and frozen shrimp. They're very convenient. You can take out as much as you need for any given service and maintain the rest frozen for a later date. So the way that shrimp are classified is a per count per pound. So let's take a look at this. So this drawing here gives you a good example of this. So if you take a look at the extra small, which are down at the bottom of the screen here, so it says 6170. That means that between 61 and 70 of these individual units will make up 1 pound of seafood. And so if you look over towards the extra large, between 26 and 30 of this size would make up 1 pound. And so that means that by the time you get to colossal, these ones right here, between 13 and 15 per pound, so these ones will be weighing almost an ounce apiece. And then when you get to these much larger ones, the U12s, that means under 12 per pound, or U10s, where there's under 10 per pound. These are all significantly more than 1 ounce per piece for these. So it shows you just the size that you're able to get when you're the person who's making the purchase for your operation. So now let's take a look at finfish. So finfish is when we are talking about either freshwater or saltwater, either round or flat fish, the type of fish that we're looking at that have a backbone. So these are classified into those two shapes, either round or flat. So let's take a look at round fish first. So round fish have a round body shape. They have one eye on either side. As you can see, this image right here shows where we have one eye on this side, and on the exact correlating opposite side, there is an eye on the other side. They swim upright in this type of position, going straight through the water. So these include things like cod, sea bass, mahi-mahi, trout, and tuna. And so then we also have flatfish. So flatfish are generally oval or flat in their appearance. You can see the great image right over here. And so this would include where they have both eyes up on the top surface here, because they will swim not in this way, but would swim flat on. The underneath is generally a much lighter color and a darker color on top. This is so as predators look down on them, they just see something that's dark that blends in with the actual either ocean floor or the river floor or the pond floor. And then if they're swimming below and looking up at them, they have a lighter underbelly, which gives the impression of the color that they see as they look towards the surface of the water, which is much lighter. So this includes flounder, halibut, and turbot. So let's take a look at the different characteristics that we have with our finfish. So you have either fatty or lean characteristics. You have fresh or frozen is the way that they can be purchased. They can be processed. They can be broken down into smaller parts, or they can be served whole. They can be dried. They can be brined. If they're brined, that means that they've been cured in a saltwater mix, or they can be smoked, or it can be a combination of these as well. So the market forms that we purchase them in, whole or round. We buy them drawn, where they've already been gutted. They can be dressed, where they've been gutted and had fins and possibly head and gills removed. Or it can be that there are full fish fillets, or it might be that they have a butterfly fillet, which actually have an image of a butterfly fillet right over here, where the backbone has been removed and literally the meat has been splayed out butterfly form. Or it can be a steak, like you can see the salmon steak right here, where this is actually the belly area here, where the gut has been removed, and then it's been sliced laterally across to make individual steaks. So with finfish, they're sensitive to time and temperature abuse. We have to make sure that we stay within the rules that we're given with time and temperature to maintain safety and freshness. So there are, and certainly if we're buying in frozen fish, they should be solidly frozen. We're looking for 0 degrees Fahrenheit in any frozen fish, just to make sure that we have full control over them. So we should be rejecting any frozen fish that has any ice crystals or frozen liquids in that packaging. Just like the shrimp that we saw in the video a couple of minutes ago, if you get a whole block of those shrimp that have been frozen together, that means that they have been defrosted and refrozen, not in a quick fashion, and then we have lost control over the quality of them. We don't know if they've been allowed to sit out and gathering more and more bacteria and allowing bacteria to grow in them before they were refrozen. And remember, freezing does not kill the bacteria or viruses that can be in our foods. So if we're getting anything in that looks that way, we're rejecting it immediately. So acceptable finfish should have bright red gills, as you can see in the photograph over here. Those gills should be a bright red. They should have a nice bright shiny skin. Their texture should be firm, so when you actually press down on the actual flesh, it should have a nice firmness to it, but springs back as well. The odor should be very mild, just of the ocean, a saltiness to them, possibly a seaweed kind of an aroma to them. They should not have any kind of bad, old fishy flavor smells to them at all. Their eyes should be bright, clear, and full. They should not be sunken in. And the packaging that they're in, they should be ideally surrounded by crushed, self-draining ice. You want self-draining ice so they don't end up just sitting in a pool of water that can actually harbor those bacteria. But you do want to have that ice surrounding them to keep them as cold as possible without freezing if you're intending for them to be fresh. We should always reject anything that has dull gray gills or dull dry skin. The texture, if it's getting kind of soft and squishy, which leaves an imprint if you press down onto the flesh, that's no good. If it's got a strong fishy or ammonia smell, and if you've never smelled ammonia, you'll know it the first time you do. It really sticks up at the top of your nose, at the top of your nasal passages. You can feel the ammonia that's in there if you start smelling something that contains ammonia. The eyes, if they're cloudy, red-rimmed, or sunken, we have problems. But when we receive live shellfish, so we have to understand there's differences here. So with live shellfish, it should arrive on ice. The air temperature should be 45 degrees or lower, and the internal temperature of that live shellfish should be no greater than 50 degrees Fahrenheit. They should then immediately be cooled down to 41 or below, which is what our refrigerator temperature should be, within 4 hours. If we're receiving shucked shellfish, which remember, shucked shellfish means shellfish that have been removed from their shells, so they are dead. We must only ever receive those with an internal temperature of 41 or lower. They will deteriorate rapidly. So in order to keep our shellfish safe, we have a shell stock identification tag. You can see a great example of one right over here on the right hand side. So this is a document which comes with those individual bags of shellfish. It tells you where they were harvested, and all of the details like the shipping dates and everything like that with it. It's very important that we keep these on file for 90 days. So an executive chef would generally have a file in his or her office, and they would hold on to these for at least 90 days because some types of food poisoning can take time to develop in the person who's consumed them. And so by the time they've investigated an issue, then it may be up to 90 days before they actually follow through. So you must always keep hold of these. And what you do is, because this indicates when the harvest date was, when the shipping date was, but then after that, you will actually make a note on here when that last shellfish was removed from that container, so that you know how long of a time elapsed between when they were harvested and when they were last consumed. So in order to deem that the shellfish are in the good condition, we have to be able to receive them alive. And this is critical. When you're looking at a lobster, if the lobster is limp and lifeless looking, it's probably dead or almost dead. We shouldn't use anything that's like that. These shellfish should be vibrant. If you have other types of shellfish, like mollusks, the shells should be closed and unbroken. If you have a broken mollusk shell, it's dead. If the shell is open, all you need to do is tap on it, and then they know that there's a possible predator. They should close. If they do not close, then they are dead, and they should never be used. So make sure you're receiving them fully alive if that's the condition you're purchasing them in. So reject any shellfish where they appear to be dead on arrival if they're fresh, if they have any kind of a strong fishy smell, if they are slimy, sticky, or dry, if their shells in mollusks are muddy or broken, and also if they have any freezer burn. If there's any frost or ice or any leaking in the packaging, dispose of it or send it back. Don't even accept it into your establishment, because you don't know if you can trust the way that they've been treated. So finfish, they should always be stored at 41 or lower. They should be packed if they're fresh. And whole, they should be packed on a bed of flaked or crushed ice, like you can see in the photograph over here. It should be in a self-draining ice bed. As you can see, there's a drain in our photograph right here that allows that excess melted water to drip away. The ice should be changed regularly so that you maintain that temperature. And store frozen fish should remain frozen all the time until you're ready to use it. So shellfish should be stored live in their original containers with those tags as well, always maintaining all of those. They should be stored at 41 or lower. Always make sure that you keep any frozen shellfish frozen again. So let's take a look at when we are processing some of these seafoods, and this is where we're calling it fabricating. So that's where we're possibly trimming down, scaling, gutting, and filleting various different fish. So what do we need to do this? So we need some sharp, flexible filleting knives, we need a clean and sanitized cutting board, and we may need fresh pliers in order to be able to pull out some of those bones. And so you can see over on the right here, I've got a photograph of what scaling looks like. You can actually see these individual scales that have already been plucked off the fish. You can't eat these; they're non-consumable for human beings. But you can either use a knife, or you can use one of these scalers, which you actually hold onto the back fin here, and you brush against the grain. You're pushing against these, and they literally just pop off fairly easily. And it's rather an easy thing to be able to do. But you start at the tail, at the bottom end, and you'll work your way up towards the head to efficiently take those off. So then you would gut the round fish. So you'd actually slice on the underbelly right across here, slicing through the belly and pulling out the guts, which are just generally in this area right across here. With a flatfish, it's a little different. You actually cut around the head area, and then the guts will actually be removed along with that head. It's actually a little easier to process. So let's take a look when we are filleting fish. So we have separate pieces that we take away from the bones, and that's the key part here. We're looking to eliminate as many of those bones as we possibly can, because when people eat fish, if they do get bones stuck in their throat, it can be quite dangerous. It can cause blockages. So it's important that we remove especially the larger pin bones, which can have this negative effect. So now we're removing the flesh from the bones, and we're creating 4 fillets in terms of the flatfish. on round fish, we create 2 fillets. So we remove all of the bones from those fish, and we can create various different slices of fish and different cuts of fish. As you can see at the top here, we've created goujonnés. These goujonnés are literally thin slices of the fish. They can then be breaded and they can be fried, but goujonnés is one cut. We can also do paupiètes, which is when we take a thin piece of a fillet of whatever fish you're using, and then you'd probably add some kind of stuffing, maybe some crab or something like that, and then you roll it with that stuffing inside. You can see this is a cooked version of that as well. You can create steaks, which we just saw a minute ago, the salmon steak, and then you can make individual fillet portions where you're actually using the whole fillet. So I'd like to first show you a quick video here on fabricating a striped bass. Striped bass is a good example of a round fish.
Hi, I'm Dr. Frank Costantino, the Dean for the School of Hospitality Management at the Cornerstone of New York at Monroe College. Today we're going to show you how to fabricate a round fish. First thing we want to do is we want to remove the fins. We want to be careful with the striped bass because these fins are very pointy, you can see. Turn this over. Now, before we use our fillet knife, we want to just hit it on the steel a couple times to get that knife true. I'm going to take the point of my knife and I'm going to go up into the head cavity here. I'm going to come around my gill plate, which is right here. So I free up my fillet here. Come up underneath with the knife. And then once I find that spinal column, I'm going to ride that knife right along until I get that fillet off like that. We'll turn it over, do the same thing on the other side. We'll go up into the head here. And around our gill plate, leaving the head and gill attached on the fish. Pull up that bottom of the fish, same way here. I'm going to get my knife on top of the fillet and take off that second fillet. Now we want to get rid of these bones here, so we're going to come up underneath with our knife. Using long motion, I'm going to take those bones out. And now we want to make sure that we get these small pin bones out of the fish. Usually there's about 5 or 6 of them. Now this is a fish that's usually cooked skin on. The skin gets nice and crisp. We're going to leave one skin on for you, and we'll take the skin off the other one. In the back of the fish here, flat knife. We have our round fillet, skin off, and our round fillet, skin on.
Now I'd like to show you a great example of how we prepare a flatfish.
The 2 fish I'm working with today are a lemon sole. Lemon sole's identified by the lemon shape of the body, but also a little bit of yellow piping, or a little strip of yellow which runs around by the side of the gill. The other flatfish we have here is plaice, identified by its large orange spots. For the freshness of this fish, it wants to have a little bit of give in the body, and again, a really pleasant aroma of the sea. For the preparation, what we're going to do is actually fillet the fish, and the best way to do that is to take a sharp filleting knife, turn the fish towards you, and then cutting close into the back of the head, I'm going to mark, making sure that I don't cut too much into the flesh. Having marked with my knife, I'm then going to use scissors just to cut the head off. A fishmonger would just use the knife to continue this, but to be on the safe side, scissors is a better option. Having done that, if you wanted to cook this fish whole, you'd need to clean it out a little bit. You'd need to remove the bloodline, which is in this part of the fish where my finger is, and you'd also need to trim away these fins. A little bit of seasoning, and you can just cook the fish as it is. I'm going to show you the method that a chef would use to fillet the fish. A fishmonger would use a slightly different technique. We want to take 4 fillets off this fish, and to do so, I'm going to make an incision using the whole length of the blade right the way down the centre of the fish until I actually come into contact with the bone. I'm going to make a little mark towards the tail end of the fish to give me a point of exit. Running my finger along the inside of the bone, I can feel a little ridge of backbone in there, and that's where I'm going to actually lie and rest my knife. And taking the tip of the knife, I'm going to just gradually draw it down the middle, listening for that pinging of the bone. I'm going to do that once, and then a second time, and then using a long sweeping action, I'm going to stroke the fillet away from the bone. Stroking right to the edge, put the knife down and pull the fillet away. So that is fillet number 1. I'm then going to turn the fish this way round, and again getting the tip of the knife over the backbone, so you're resting it on that little ridge of bones and then dragging it down, and this way you keep really, really close to the actual bone and not leave too much flesh behind. Then a long sweeping action again. Always avoid doing small cutting actions, long sweep, so you end up with a nice clean cut. And when you get to that stage, if you're concerned about cutting yourself, turn the fish away from you and point the knife and sweep that around right to the edge to take the fillet away. That gives you 2 fillets. You then would turn the fish over to the second side, or the white side, exactly the same as before, using the whole length of the blade, make an incision straight the way through to the bone, and then exactly as before, leaning the fish down or leading the knife down and stroking the fish fillet away using that long sweeping action. And that's how you would fillet your fish. Again, a little bit of roe there that I'm going to discard. The second side as before. Having filleted the fish, I'm then going to turn my attentions to the skinning. We're going to start with the fish fillet so that you have the thinnest part of the fillet towards you, and you skin the fish so that you actually have the skin side in contact with the board. Using the knife, I'm going to start at the thin end of the fillet and carefully cutting away and getting the good angle with your knife so that you're keeping really close to the skin. You can practically feel the knife squeaking against the skin as you lift the fillet away. You need to have a good contact with the knife and then pull the skin towards you. So you have an action with pulling towards you and cutting away with the knife. Keeping good contact with the skin, peel that away. The skin can go into stock if you want that later. A well-skinned piece of fish should have a nice gloss and shine on the actual fish fillet. And these little bits of trimming we can pull away and use those in stock as well. And again, exactly the same process with the other 4 fillets.
And so now we can start looking at our shellfish and how we fabricate them. So we have things like clams and oysters. They're generally served in the half shell. So this involves shucking. So again, shucking is when we are removing them from their own shells. So we're opening and removing them. So we must make sure we scrub them and clean them under cold running water. You want to keep them cold. Again, we're keeping them out of the temperature danger zone as much as we possibly can. But we're also looking to remove any sand and grit. It's one of the worst things that you can actually have beyond things like viruses and bacteria that can infect your seafood and your shellfish is sand and grit. It has an awful feeling and awful texture on the palate. So when it comes to lobsters, one of the easiest ways for us to be able to remove the meat from the shell of a lobster is to either cook it or partially cook it. The flesh will actually slightly shrink inside there. It makes it much easier to be able to remove. So we may want to blanch our lobster either in a steam bath with boiling water or in a hot oven. Alright, I have a quick video here that's all about preparing that cooked Maine lobster and how exactly you can yield as much meat as you possibly can from this relatively expensive piece of seafood.
Cooked Maine lobster. So here I have a cooked lobster. I'm going to show you how to take all of the meat out. So starting with the arms, we'll just pinch from the joints, down and twist out, and go into the back tail, give it a twist one way, and finish it out the other way. And then for the legs, snap them off get the tail meat out in the easiest way, these back fins here, they kind of peel right off by just snapping them back. And you'll see already the tail meat is starting to expose itself. Holding the lobster tail between your fingers in both hands, give it a squeeze one time. And then you'll turn it away from you and pull outwards. This should free up the entire tail, leaving nothing inside. Moving on to the crusher claw. Pull this claw down on its joint away. As soon as you hear that crack, pull up on the other side to free up the bottom half. And just give it like a little twist as it comes out. And you should leave the claw meat still attached to the claw. From here, we can separate out the knuckle, and then again from the leg joint. With the crusher claw, use a heavy back knife and just give it a smack right on the fattest part there. Same thing on the other side. Once you have those two sides cracked, you can pretty much just take your hand and crush it. Careful not to destroy the meat on the inside. Wiggle that claw right out. The same thing to the pincher. Pull it straight out. For the knuckle meat, you can use a specialized tool like this, specifically made for scooping out lobster meat. Go in through one of the openings, run the tip of it along the edge of the shell, trying to stay as tight as possible and not break into any of the meat. You come in through the other side and you can just push and shimmy that knuckle meat right out. For the remaining parts of the leg, stick a skewer, the end of a spoon, something thin and non-flexible, in to this first joint here, and you can kind of pop right out. And that meat comes right out, just like that. An often underutilized part of the lobster is actually their legs. People think that there's little to no meat in them and they don't see it as a worthwhile project to take on. It's actually really easy and pretty fun. You have a rolling pin, you lay these out flat on a cutting board, and kind of like toothpaste, you can just squeeze that meat out. The meat just squeezes right out. So this is a lobster fully picked. Your crusher, your pincher, your knuckles, your leg meats, and then your remainder leg meat, and your tail.
And so when we're looking at things like shrimp, so we need to be able to remove the shell on those. And we've seen the example there of deveining the shrimp as well, removing the digestive tract from that shrimp, very important. And so then when we're looking at our mollusks, so we'll be scrubbing the outside of the shell, as you can see over in the photograph here, using either our hands or a brush to remove any of that sand or grit that can leave that bad residue that can be damaging to our finished dish. Using a cut-resistant glove, so this can be either a Kevlar or a chainmail glove of some sort that helps us to protect our hands, because then we will actually use a clam knife if we're opening clams, or an oyster knife if we're opening oysters. They almost look like a miniature dagger that you would use to insert in between the actual top and bottom shell to pop the shell open on these fish. And so you work your way around the opening, as you can see in the photograph here. You'd actually look to insert that knife in, insert it further in, and then you give it a twist, and that will pop open those shells without damaging the meat inside, because you want to be very careful not to do that, because there's valuable meat that's in there, and you want to detach the clam from the actual shell in this case. So then when we're just to round up, when we're looking at our round fish, you cut behind the head, right behind the gill area, running knife down the length of the fish, from the head to the tail, turning the fish to the second side, working from the tail to the head, and trimming away the belly bones, and then after that slicing between the skin and the flesh, angling it down slightly, and then using a sawing motion, keeping that skin tight so that you can actually take off the skin itself, and then using tweezers or a pair of pliers to actually remove the bones, the pin bones that you can see right over here, the type of bones that can get stuck in your throat. And so just to confirm it with you, so round fish always have 2 fillets that we will finish with. And then so peeling and deveining shrimp, we're peeling away the actual shell itself, cutting along that back vein to remove everything that's in there, taking out that intestinal tract. And then pairing fish with cooking techniques. So this is really important when we're trying to figure out how we're going to cook each fish and the best kind of ways to cook each fish. So you have some fish that are very oily. You have mackerel in particular, has a huge amount of oil in it. So these types of fish require a good dry heat cooking to get the best flavors out of those fish. Then when you have the moderately fatty fish, things like tuna and salmon, these can actually use any cooking method with these because they have enough fat to cook in a dry cooking method, but they cook up wonderfully in a moist cooking method too. And then you have other very lean fish like sole, flounder, and a lot of other white-fleshed fish, which they tend to poach or saute better. So let's look at a few of these cooking methods. So dry heat cooking, so baking, broiling, grilling. So that's good for either fatty fish, lean fish, or shellfish. When we're looking at dry heat cooking methods that include fat or oil, so this can be things like shallow frying, that would be lean fish and shellfish. Then moist cooking processes like poaching, simmering, and steaming. So this works well with fatty fish, lean fish, and shellfish. And then we have our combination cooking. So this is where we are stewing and braising. We're starting with a dry cooking method at first, and then adding some kind of moisture to go into a moist cooking method. So this is the combination cooking methods. And so this is for fatty fish, lean fish, and shellfish. So when we take a look at our dry heat cooking methods, if we're taking our fatty fish, we may be breaking those down into individual fillets, or we may be slicing them right across to make into a steak. They can be baked, broiled, or grilled. With most fish, you would be baking them around about 350 and 400 degrees Fahrenheit. You would want, if you're cooking a larger fish, say if it's a larger piece of salmon that's much wider at certain areas, especially up towards the head, you'd want to cook it on the lower end of this scale. So you'd be looking at more like 350 because you're trying to evenly cook that fish. So it's important that we retain moisture in our fish while we're cooking it. So if you're doing a dry heat cooking method, say if you're frying, then you may want to breadcrumb it. Maybe want to add some crushed nuts to the outside. This is going to create a protective coating around the outside of that fish. You can thinly slice some vegetables to wrap around it, or even meat, something like prosciutto. You can wrap prosciutto around maybe a piece of halibut. That will work wonderfully, and it protects that flesh while it's cooking so that the outer edge doesn't go dry. And then grilling or broiling, that works well on, but just make sure that you always oil the grill or the broiler, the bars that the fish is going to sit on, to avoid sticking. If you ever have fish that sticks, the probability of tearing that flesh and ruining the appearance of it is significantly raised. So you always want to make sure you're avoiding that. So when we're looking at lean finfish and shellfish, so they can saute, stir fry, or pan fry, or deep fry really well. These are all rapid cooking methods here. So we'll want to make sure we're coating the fish with some kind of a protective measure, and so that can include just lightly dousing in flour, or it might be doing a full breading on it. And you can cook them really well in clarified butter or oil, or a combination of both to really infuse wonderful flavors into them. So when you're looking at small items, so we've got small shrimp and scallops, things like that, they tend to be very delicate. So they can have the probability of overcooking, going rubbery as the proteins start to cook through. So you want to very quickly just saute them, stir fry them, or pan fry these items. When you're looking at larger items, again, we're looking at doing a lower heat so that they evenly cook through without overcooking any of the outer edges before the center is cooked through. So when we're deep frying, we're going to use fresh fish. Then we're going to make sure that we're using a high quality fat, and we're going to need to serve it immediately. Anytime you're deep frying fish, it will dry out rapidly afterwards, so we have to make sure that we're cooking it and serving it immediately. So if we're breading it, we're going to be breading it right before you're cooking. It helps to protect it from that boiling fat, and it gives that nice crispy coating. Make sure when you're breading it, or if you're flouring it, that you don't let it just sit in that breading or the flour beforehand. Unless if it's been frozen, it will make it go soggy. So then if we're looking at poaching fish, so very often we can poach fish in certain different kinds of liquids. This could include a core bouillon. A core bouillon is a vegetable stock, and we would add some kind of acid to that. It might be lemon juice or a vinegar to that. Or we could poach it in a fumet, which is a very rich and concentrated fish stock. Or you can even poach it in olive oil or butter, or a combination. However, bear in mind, when I'm talking about cooking it and poaching it in olive oil or butter, that doesn't mean frying it. Even though this is a fat, we're not frying it, we'd be cooking it at a lower temperature, so that it is just gently poaching and never boiling that oil to fry it. So then we can also use shallow poaching as one of our moist heat cooking processes. And this works well for fish and shellfish. You're just going to be looking for that fish to become opaque, and the things like oysters, clams, and mussels should just start having a curling on the edges. You have to be careful though not to overcook them. You want them to stay moist and tender. So that's why we're poaching. We're not boiling, we're poaching. If you boil, it will actually remove more of the oils from that fish and dry it out, and probably overcook it too. We want to, if you're cooking it too long or at too high of a heat, you'll see white deposits coming out from it, and you'll have some stringiness, dryness, and excessive flaking where the fish is just falling apart. That should not be the case. So there's another cooking method that we can use as well. This is technically a moist cooking method, even though no moisture is added. This is a very classical method called en papillote, and it literally translates as in a paper bag. And so you see this is actually a large piece of parchment, and you have the piece of fish inside that parchment with any other things you may want to have in there, maybe some lemons, some dill, or any other kind of herbs, some seasoning in there, possibly even adding some vegetables that would probably have been part cooked beforehand, that could be added in there, and you'll actually bake that in the oven, so that inside that paper bag, en papillote, it will actually steam itself inside there, using all of the natural moisture that's already inside the fish itself. It makes it very tender, gives it lots of flavor. No flavor is lost from it because everything is contained in there. If you do have a thicker piece of fish, you may need to sear it first, just to make sure that you're cooking it all the way through without drying anything out. A modern version of doing this is actually to wrap the fish in banana leaves, and that can actually help because there's some moisture in those banana leaves as well to maintain the moisture level. But either way, this works really well. Lots of flavor in this process. And then we have our combination cooking method. So this includes this is stewing and braising, so using dry and moist heat methods in there. So this includes bouillabaisse, which is a French seafood stew, or chopino, which is a San Francisco seafood stew, or jambalaya, which is a Creole style stew from Louisiana. How do we determine that our fish is cooked? So the flesh should turn from a translucent to an opaque color, or an opaque appearance. The flesh should be firm, and it should be able to easily just pull away from the bone. And the flesh should just be beginning to flake. It shouldn't be breaking up. It should be just beginning to flake. If in doubt, then we should be using thermometers. We should be serving our fish and shellfish cooked to 145 degrees all the time. So I know this chapter had a lot of information going on in there. We have a lot of different types of seafood available to us in the United States and from around the world. But hopefully this covered all the things that you may not have been aware of. If you have any questions, feel free. Please do talk to me about it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next chapter. Cheers.